So we've been listening to everything around AI today, starting from how great AI is to how wonderful it is to have an AI assistant even for a welcome note, to how we are taking some steps in terms of implementing AI. However, I would like to state the contrarian view. When I was on the ground speaking to, let's say, I think if I count right, 11 CIOs and CTOs in the last 13 weeks, none of them were happy with the implementation of AI in any of their enterprises. And I spoke to folks in banking, financial services, retail, healthcare, these three sectors. And when I read a report from IMF published in April 2025, it projected the GDP impact of AI by 2030. So IMF believes that AI is not going to have any kind of material impact on the world GDP, even in the next 5 years. So what is the reality, right? Is the reality what we hear in media, or is the reality what some folks in some places are telling me and some reports somewhere are being published? To discuss this very important topic, as each of you thinks about what you need to do in your own offices and in your personal lives around AI, I don't think I could have asked for a better panel. We have Rajan, of course, as introduced. He's been, the reason I wanted him is he has more than 30 years of deep tech experience in large companies like Google, etc. Now he has been investing in this space for multiple years. We have Chandini. She is deep into tech, has been creating startups on automation, now AI, etc. We want to find out what is working and what is not working, right? That's the essence of today's 30 minutes. And I will start with Rajan. Rajan, you've seen so many waves. You've seen SaaS, you've seen internet. Paris had a nice slide on all the waves. Why is this different? And firstly, is it different? Why is it different? And if you can also tell us, where is the gravy in AI? Like, what is it that really makes your eyes pop up when you look at something or someone that is working on AI?
Yeah, hi everyone. Well, thanks for having us. By the way, I'm glad IMF doesn't try to be in venture capital or startup companies, because the world wouldn't move forward. I mean, I'm a big fan of the IMF, but look, I think what is different this time around, and by the way, every wave creates significant value, right? In fact, if you look at market cap creation of new entities that were born in that era, basically every wave. So if you go back, the PC wave, the internet wave, the mobile wave, the cloud wave, every wave has created double the value of the previous wave, right? And if you look at just market cap creation, over the next 10 years, we think that there's going to be about 10 trillion, which is actually just pure play. So it's going to be quite significant. Now, in terms of why is that? I think it's because for the first time in human history, we're getting machines to have intelligence, right? Now, we can all argue what level of intelligence is it? Is it really AGI? Is it super intelligence? But certainly, I think how many of you actually use either Gemini or ChatGPT? Just put your hands up. Yeah, fair number of you, right? So I think all of you, when you first tried it 2 years ago, I'm sure will agree that it's quite magical. So for the first time, you're seeing software have a level of intelligence that it didn't have, right? And the other thing that's important is whatever you're seeing today is going to improve by 100x a year from now. And this has not happened before, right? I was at MIT. Actually, Chandini wasn't born yet.
Thank you for
when
that.
I was working on neural networks. No, you weren't. So, I was working on neural networks. That was that long ago, right? At the MIT Media Lab. And if I just compare what you can do today with AI to what we were able to do then, I mean, it's just phenomenal, right? Now, what does that mean? I think what that means is we are now able to, and by the way, software always was able to add value, right? That's why we have globally a $200, $300 billion software products in this $200 billion SaaS industry, close to a $500, $600 billion software products industry, and you have a multi-trillion-dollar IT services industry, right? So it always created value. If it didn't create value, you don't have it. But I think now what we have is this ability to create 10x value, right? And Chandini can talk about in banking, in the specific things that they do, what that really materializes. And we believe that is the case. What we've seen, to your point about talking to CIOs, you're absolutely right. I think AI adoption in the enterprise is still very early, because when a wave like this starts, what we've seen is the first set of users who adopt new technology at scale are consumers, if it's relevant to consumers, right? So ChatGPT went from 0 to 100 million users in 2 years. Now it's over 500 million weekly active users. It's been a little over 2 years since it launched. So you see consumers. Then you see prosumers, right? Prosumers, creators, YouTube creators. We have a company in Bombay. They went from 0 to 7 million, 70 million of revenue, right? So over 600 crores of revenue with 90% gross margin in 19 months. It's a company called InVideo, because what they do is they help YouTube creators. Used to take them 4 hours to create a video. Now it takes them 2 minutes. You charge them $20 a month. Of course, they're going to pay, right? And then you keep going down. SMBs, developers, right? So I'm sure most of your companies, if you have engineering teams, they're either using Cursor or GitHub Copilot or Windsurf. The reality is, for new code writing, any developer who is developing, who's building new code as opposed to maintaining old code has to be using it, right? And so as a result, you've seen, I hosted Aman, who's the co-founder of Cursor, in February. They had just crossed $100 million of revenue. They didn't have a single salesperson and no marketing people, okay? 3 months later, they crossed $500 million of revenue. Entirely bottom up, developer adoption, right? So I think that's the wave that you see, and I think now we're getting into enterprise, and what we're seeing in enterprise is, look, there are about 3 or 4 use cases in the most advanced enterprises that are now being reasonably well adopted across the enterprise, right? You mentioned coding. For new code, right? I mean, coding AI is a must-have. I mean, if you're running, I think most of you probably have large engineering teams, development teams, right? I mean, you've got to be on it, and I think soon you'll see AI be able to do modernizing code, right? Like that's one of the big theses we're after. The second area is really customer support. I don't know how many of you know this, but like today, look, an AI agent in Indian language, in Marathi, in Tamil, in Kannada can run a 10-minute call better than a human. That's a fact. That's a given, right? So in fact, there's a company here in Bangalore that we're early investors in called Sarvam, right? Which is building India's Indic language frontier models. So customer support, many aspects, right? Like for instance, I'm shocked at how many US banks, I still have a Citibank account in the US. I don't know if there's anybody here from Citibank. I love it. I'm sorry you guys sold your India business, the retail business. But I still have to talk to a human. Like really? Whoa, why is that? Customer support, I think it's a big. Third one is enterprise search, knowledge management, right? When I was at Microsoft, I used to, really be excited about SharePoint. I mean, like if you have to build knowledge management portals using SharePoint today, hello, welcome, it's 2025, right? So there are companies like Glean and so on, right, that really have enterprise search. And then outside of that, what we're really seeing is very, very interesting use cases by industry. Right, in banking, there are probably 20 or 30 of them. Chandini will talk about what they're up to. Same thing in retail, same thing in insurance, same thing in healthcare, where essentially for specific use cases, you can apply, build essentially AI use cases, right? Build agentic applications that can deliver 10x value, right? Something that used to take a human 1-2 weeks, maybe a month, now can be done in a couple of hours, in minutes sometimes, or in a day, right? And that is pretty transformational. And the last thing I'd say is, it was really great to listen to the Honeywell CTO speak before this, because a lot of the discussion today in AI is about generative AI, right? But the reality is AI is a much, much broader set of technologies, right? That go from computer vision, to speech to text, all the way through generative AI. And when you combine all of that, I think the impact that you can see in any enterprise is quite significant. But I'd end with where you started, which is, look, it is early, and I think through the course of the next 20 minutes, we'll talk about what are the barriers.
Interesting. Interesting you made all the use cases. The first 2 have been around for 2 years, right? Software development. And I do want to make this point. If software development is truly being disrupted, I don't know why all our reports are saying that the GCC headcount is going to grow. Because technically you should be able to do it.
No, that's because the leaders of GCC aren't measured on how many agents they measure.
Good. So you have a new metric, guys. Right. Number of agents versus number of people, I guess. It's true. Otherwise, we'll all...
I mean, an agent is like a human, but it like works 24/7. It doesn't want to take vacation. You know, like,
Good. So I hope each of you can measure that. The second is all the processes. About 30% of all GCC here is running processes. Pari mentioned one, revenue cycle management. Shouldn't that all be done with agents? And why are we not projecting decrease in headcount versus annual increase in all our headcounts in all our GCCs? It's something to think about, whether AI is truly disrupting or we are just making a lot of noise around AI. Chandni, coming to you, right? Same question, and I really like having you on the panel because you've been doing this, you have walked away from cases, you've been able to run cases, you're able to see problems and people either not investing or trying to over-invest in difficult problems. So from your vantage point of being deep into implementation in one particular area, financial services, what is it that you see work? What do you see not work?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Chandini. I'm one of the founders of Auquan. At Auquan, we basically automate work that people do manually in finance but shouldn't be doing. Right? So whenever we go to a customer and they're like, we have this bunch of data. The data is really annoying. It's very messy. It's all over the place. And then we have a team of people manually look through all of this data, read it, analyze it, and produce fairly structured, standardized outputs. We're like, no. People should not be doing this work. This is the kind of work that you should be leaving to AI, and that's the kind of work that we automate for our clients. We work with a lot of very large financial organizations. So we work with very large banks. UBS is a customer. We work with insurance firms. MetLife is a customer. We work with a lot of private equity, private credit firms. KKR is a customer. And across all of these, it's literally, sometimes it's amusing, it's shocking when we go and talk to them and they're like, yeah, we have this room full of people, 500 people, literally all they do day in and day out is look through a bunch of this data, look through Excel files, look through PDFs, look through PowerPoint presentations, none of this data is standardized, and then they create another Excel file or another PowerPoint presentation or another PDF. And then, so that's on one end, and then on the other side, they're like, yeah, we're kind of headcount constrained, so there's all these other strategic things that we're not able to get to. And it's like, wait, you should be automating all of this stuff and use this headcount, which actually has intellectual capabilities beyond the work that they're doing today, and focus them on some of your more strategic priorities, right? And so that's the kind of work that we automate. To answer your question, just in terms of use cases, but also to highlight a couple of things that Rajan said. One, I am surprised at the number of hands that went up. I expected everyone to have their hands raised. At this point, like, you should be using AI, at least as a consumer, right? You're a 10x human if you're using AI. I write all my emails with AI. I analyze all of my notes with AI. It lets me do so much more. And that's on the consumer side, right? Makes sense. I'm a person. I want to be productive in my day-to-day life. Now, when you come to enterprise, you're working with a different paradigm. You're much more conservative with what you want to do, especially in the market that we work with, a very regulated industry, very risk-averse industry. Errors are just not acceptable. You have to work in a zero error. I think the Honeywell CTO was talking about, like, even one single error can lead to millions of dollars of losses, increased downtime in their plants. It's the same in finance. One single error in your output can lead to a bad decision, can lead to the regulator coming and knocking down your door about some risk that you overlooked. So you can only deploy a technology in production when you have the confidence that, one, it works as you expect it to, and two, the accuracy, it meets the bar, the very high bar that you need from your software. And that, I think, is the biggest contributor to why we haven't seen the kind of adoption in enterprise that we have seen in consumer. So, for example, we work a lot with the risk and compliance teams, and before working with us, every time they would be doing a transaction. So you've decided to, you invest in a company, or you've decided to give loan to a counterparty. Every time they've decided to do a transaction, they have to go through a checklist of closing items. So somebody in their legal team gets a ping saying, hey, are we okay to do this transaction? Somebody in their compliance team gets a ping saying, are we okay to do this transaction? And somebody on their ops side gets a ping. Now, on the compliance side, once they get a ping, this one analyst will look through all of the counterparty disclosed data, which is a whole mess of documents in SharePoint. They will then pull data from multiple different data vendors. They will then go and run searches on the internet. They will go to a sanctions provider. They will kick off a background check. All of this takes them like 10 to 12 hours to do. Once they have all of this data, then they spend another few hours just analyzing all of this data to see, are there any compliance risks with the company? Does the company align with all of the regulations that they have to align with? Do they align with all of their LP mandates? Is there all of the side letter compliance? A whole bunch of things to check through. Then they manually type out the report, and then they send it back to the team that's trying to do this transaction to say, cool, everything's okay, you're good to move forward, or here are 2 or 3 risks that you should be aware of. It takes them 10 to 20 hours to do this for one single transaction, right? We went and worked with a bunch of our customers doing this, and we understood what their data looked like, we understood what this process was, we built and deployed an agent for them, and now all it takes them to do, all it takes is somebody on the deal team goes and drags some data, enters the name of a company, presses the run button, goes about their day, does their work. 20 minutes later, a report is ready for them. They look through the report. If there are any issues, if there are no issues, they just go about their life, go do this transaction. If there are issues, that's when they ping the compliance person to say one or two of these things came out as an issue. Can you look through this? Can you tell me if I'm okay to do this transaction? So they're doing this work in 20 minutes. The person who previously used to do this work doesn't even need to touch the work unless they need it. And they're just like, there's so much less operational drag in the company. And that's where, and the last thing is, when they look through the output that AI comes up with, sometimes they're like, we wouldn't even have picked up this risk. This is actually better than if we had done this ourselves. And when you start to see that kind of output from AI, like almost that shock value of this is 10x, 20x, 100x faster than if I had done it before. It's better than if I had done it myself. I'm actually cutting through a lot of red tape and organizational drag that I would have otherwise had to go through. That's when you really start to see adoption in enterprise.
Interesting. That's a good 2-3 use. I'll come back to you on the second point. Rajan, I want to touch upon very quickly, if there are private equity folks here, there are investors here as well, plus there are a bunch of entrepreneurs. When you look at venture today, and all of them are AI first for sure, because I've seen CEOs of companies have AI first CEO written, so I'm sure all startups are AI first. What is it that you look at to differentiate this, to figure out that yes, this is true, this is right, this will work, this is in my investment horizon? What are the true litmus tests, 2 or 3, that you look at? And feel free to even give out certain areas where you think things are going to grow. And more importantly, things that people should not be touching right now.
Yeah, I think the first thing, by the way, is India today, because we are sitting in India, has the most broad-based startup and innovation ecosystem on planet Earth, right? So AI is only one segment of Indian startups. You have a lot of consumer startups in commerce, in brands, in gaming. You have a lot of healthcare startups. You have a lot of financial services startups. You have space tech. You have semiconductors. So actually, we have not seen what we're seeing in India today. So I think it's important that everything is not in the Bay Area, like today in the US, it's all about AI, and it's really only about AI, right? Whereas India, it's AI and another AI, which is all about India. So it's AI squared, right? Now, coming to AI, look, I think depending on what stage we're investing in, right? If you're investing very early stage, it's really a bet on the founding team, right? So Chandini and her co-founder, they've been in banking for a long time. They have deep insights about what they're up to. Now, in their case, they had a couple of customers. Now they have like a large number of customers.
Are you saying deep understanding of industry?
Of the domain, right? So you want basically, look, it depends, right? Like, are you trying to build a model company? Are you a Sarvam? Are you trying to build a tooling company like a Prakalpa? You know, is Atlan their data governance, you know, like data governance cataloging platform? Or are you an application company like, you know, Auquan? There are many companies here actually that you all should connect with. So depending on what you're trying to build, right? We're trying to say, look, are these founders, do they have a deep understanding of the domain? There needs to be a good mix of sort of business and tech. So, right, like we look for the founding team. I'd say that's one. But the second thing is, look, a lot of companies, especially early stage, where I kind of live, very early stage investments, is there's not much to look at, right? Like there's no customers yet, or maybe there's like 1 or 2 customers. Then what we try to understand is a very simple thing. Can AI deliver a 10x outcome, right? So Chandini explained, right? So if it took, let's say, a certain set of team members in, let's say, a KKR or a big bank, 20 hours to do it, you know, can it really be done in 10 minutes? Because that is a 10x outcome, right? So we really try to obsess about that, right? Either now or let's say where we can see AI going in the next 6 or 12 months, can you deliver a 10x outcome, right? And so that's the second thing we look at. I think the third thing we look at is if a company has a few customers, we talk to customers, right? And because that is the acid test. Like, 2 years ago, we invested in an Indian startup. They only had one customer. It was called Reliance. And Reliance was a large customer. Those of you in India, which looks like most of you. If you can sell to Reliance a 10 crore deal, get paid on time, and they think you're fantastic, we are investing. Because that's a really hard customer to work with, right? Like, because they are very demanding and they're large scale and your systems have to work and so on and so forth. So that's what we look at. But specifically, I want to come to, is it a 10x use case? And then the other thing we also try to understand is, look, the reality is the models are going to get better. They're going to get 10x better, 100x better. So what we say is, look, if OpenAI, let's say the next version of the 5.0, let's say GPT-5 or Gemini, the next version of Gemini or Claude, is that good for you or is that bad for you, right? Does your product get better because your models are getting better, or could you get wiped out? Because a lot of AI startups will just get wiped out. I call it OpenAI roadkill, right? So we try to sort of think through that. And what we, one of the type of AI companies we like a lot as a firm is vertical AI companies, right? So let's say banking, insurance, retail, healthcare, because of 3 reasons. One, over time, especially once you start getting access to internal data, you have access to proprietary data, which the models don't have, right? Because the models are basically running on open web data, right? And large companies don't want to share their data with the big models. Second, you can integrate into workflows, right? So once you're integrated into, let's say, what the analyst does 4 or 5 hours a day in a bank or a private equity firm or an asset manager, it's kind of hard to kind of then pull you out, right? And third, look, we like vertical AI because, it's just less competitive. Right? Because you need the domain expertise. So for instance, in healthcare, we have an investment called Arintra. Arintra basically uses AI agentic approach to automating medical coding. Right? In the US, hospital spends tens of billions of dollars once you go into a procedure to make it into a medical coding. They use AI to automate 95% of it. Right? All of a sudden, that's a 10x product. It's proprietary data. You get integrated into workflows of the RCM. You talked about RCM. One part of RCM is sort of medical coding. And it's kind of hard. And, selling to large hospital systems takes a long time. Very difficult to sell. Once you're integrated, it's hard. So those are the set of things we look at.
No, that makes a lot of sense, right? 10x, I think that's a good litmus test. The second thing you mentioned is vertical, and this is in line with all the things that I heard from the CIO, CTOs. The biggest grouse was with one company called OpenAI, and they believed that they didn't understand anything about their company or their business. So I think this fits perfectly. Service providers, startups who understand vertical and can then marry the technology. What we learned in engineering called applied engineering.
Yeah,
right?
my
Very
question
simple.
to you actually was going to be when you said you spoke to those 10, 11 CTOs, CIOs, and they didn't see the returns or they weren't happy with the AI implementation. What was the flavor of AI implementation? Was it they basically bought ChatGPT enterprise licenses, rolled it across the org and hoped magic will happen? Did they actually identify use cases?
Yeah,
and
I think just rolling out ChatGPT is like a basic, so everybody is doing that.
Yeah.
However, when it comes to enterprise problems, like in a retail store, can AI do anything to make it better, to improve my revenue, to improve my throughput, to reduce my shrink? Those are the use cases they're still not able to implement beyond the basic automation, right? So that is what the concern was. And the underlying concerns were multiple. It could be data. Most importantly, the concern was the out-of-the-box models were not giving satisfactory results. And companies who promised to curate the models or tweak the models said that it will cost them millions and over multiple months, right? I think that was the big concern. Third, obviously, they didn't understand the workflow. And this brings me to you again, Chandni. When you go into a company, or if there are GCCs here, each of them is running AI programs for their own companies, the large enterprises. What would be your suggestion to them or recommendation in terms of how do you even shortlist these use cases? Where will you see win, or where would you, start, burn, fail, and then maybe not get another chance?
Yeah. So actually, the first one ties back to kind of Rajan's answer when he was saying we prefer founding teams with domain expertise and 10x return. At least in enterprise, the AI implementation has to be use case specific. It has to be team specific, right? The challenge there is, one, you're kind of dealing with the messiness of real world data. The reason we haven't automated this work so far is because it's not, a lot of the times it's not because the the work cannot be automated. It's either the data is super messy or the process is quite complex. And if you started to write down code to explain the entire process and all of the edge cases and all these scenarios you would see, you're looking at like 1,000,000 lines of code, right? And that wasn't possible, so it's just easier to get people to do it, right? Now, if you want to start automating that, the implementation has to be use case specific. You have to work with a domain-specific vendor rather than work with a horizontal model. There are horizontal model use cases, right? If you're trying to implement something which summarizes documents for all of your org, writes emails for all of your org, Microsoft Copilot is great, ChatGPT Enterprise is great. But when you start getting into some of the gnarliness of real-world workflows, right? I want to automate this very specific task. I want to automate how my entire org's financial reconciliation gets done. You have to think through what is my org's data, not just like what is the general world data. You have to think through what is our process. What does Jane, who sits in accounting, do when she sees an invoice that is actually an OCR and it doesn't meet the parameters of how we think about financial reconciliation, right? And all of that comes with like thinking through use cases. Now, to answer your question of like how do you think about use cases, and by the way, this is something we deal with our customers all the time. From we have no use cases, which is like you cannot have no use cases that AI can automate, to we have identified these 25 use cases, let's do it all together. It's like, no, that's also not great. If you think 25 of your teams are within 2 or 3 months going to suddenly start adopting AI and drop their old ways, that's also not happening. So let's start.
Do you have like a framework? You force them to use a framework, or you do it for them?
Yeah, we kind of, it's a partnership. In a lot of these cases, you can't force a form on your customer, right? So it's almost a partnership, it's a conversation. Sometimes people will come with ideas of, this is a super painful workflow, this is the first one that you want to go with, and you really start to dig in, and it's like someone does it for 45 minutes every week. It's like, that's, the amount of time you will invest in looking through the data, automating the process, running evals on the process versus the ROI that you will get out of it, it's really not an AI problem, it's a resource problem. Sometimes on the other side, it's like, okay, this is the low-hanging fruit. We don't think that's the best use case to go after. It's like, okay, I understand it's not the highest value use case, but actually 100 people do this for half an hour every day. Why don't we start with that, right? That it is a low-hanging fruit, so it's actually an easy use case to go after. It lets your team get familiar with AI. It lets them get familiar with this new way of working. It lets them get familiar with agents.
So basically, cumulative number of hours of that use case across the organization. That's a good place to
it's
say,
basically,
okay.
in the end, it's the ROI, right? What is the, how quickly can you implement something? If this is something that will take 6 months to implement versus like 6 weeks to implement, prefer faster implementation. How many people get affected by it? Is this like a small team of 10 people or like hundreds or thousands of people? And then hours saved. What is the actual productivity gain? And can you quantify that? Well, hours saved is not a good example. What is the productivity gain? Is it hours saved? Then you quantify it that way. Is it better output? Then quantify it that way. Is it better data collection, more accurate results? Then quantify it that way. But it's usually a mix of those three.
Got it. Somehow I didn't hear anything around what I typically hear, right? Data sufficiency, data being in the right format, etc. Is that something that you are okay with and you solve it when you get in? Or is that something that you walk away from saying that, hey, this company doesn't even have the data. What do I do with it?
So we don't walk away from it, but I'd say 50% of the magic of what we do or what any startup is able to do when they're producing good outputs is in their ability to deal with data, right? For any foundation model, it's basically junk data and junk results out, right? So you can have the fanciest, the best models and the best implementation of the model. If whatever you've done on the data pipeline, if you're not capturing the data well, if you're not processing the data well, if the data is not sitting in a good format to AI to even work with, nothing's going to happen downstream. So a lot of the value that we bring is in actually understanding your data. And this is where, again, to Rajan's point, the domain specificity of the vendor becomes important. We specialize in understanding what financial PDFs look like. We specialize in understanding when you look through PowerPoints and the PowerPoints have images and charts, how to understand that. We specialize in understanding how to deal with multi-tabbed Excel, which is, by the way, a very common data format that you come across in finance, especially when people have left like footnotes all over the place, right? And how do you deal with the messiness of that kind of data? So the ability to deal with data is super important. The other thing that I would say here, just from like an AI, the success of your AI program depends also on the choice of AI that you go with, right? Like Rajan was saying, we in the last 2 years, when we talk about AI, we automatically think generative AI. But that's only one kind of AI. And when we start getting to agents, and agents are literally like digital workers that sit in the background and do your work for you, The best part about agents is you're taking the best of all of the worlds. You're taking the probabilistic nature of foundation models where they work best, which is in orchestrating a task, an agent thinking through and saying, what are the steps that I must perform to complete this task, right? And then you're using tool use, which is deterministic nature of software. So, as an example, an agent might look through a report and say, to complete this report, I need to find the company's revenue and I need to calculate EBITDA, right? That's great. You don't then want a foundation model to write the calculation of EBITDA every time because it is probabilistic. If it writes it 100 times, it will probably get it wrong one time. You want it to call a function which actually has the calculation of EBITDA written there and pull it and probabilistically decide I need to use that function, but then deterministically run that function, right? And when you start getting to the combination of probabilistic AI, computer vision, text-to-speech, and then deterministic code, that's really when you start to see magic happen.
Interesting. No, I think this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm kind of out of time. So before I close, Rajan, I'll give you, can you take just 1 minute to maybe summarize two things, right? One, where is AI real? And second, what is the expectation that you have from the GCC community when it comes to AI?
Yeah, I think firstly, look, AI, AI is real, right? I think AI adoption in the enterprise is still very early for the reasons we spoke about. I do think, to your previous question that you asked, Chandni, I think for all of you, whether it's GCC or any large company today, right? I think deeply understanding where AI can create disproportionate value, right?
10x,
with real AI. Yeah, 10x values, like measurable real ROI. Like, there's a company called Zamp here. Amit Jain is here. They use AI to agentify all finance back office across industries, right? 50% reduction. That's what they're able to do with the best, largest tech companies in the Bay Area, right? So like the reality is it's very real. I think being able to understand that and then focus on those, call it 3 or 5 use cases to make it work. I think the time is now. The time is now. And I would say, look, the ask from the innovation ecosystem from all of you, I had mentioned this at a conference a couple of months ago, is, see, India today has leagues of elite entrepreneurs, okay? I mean, we are now at that stage where our founders are extraordinary, right? I mean, sitting next to me is an example. What they need to know is what problems to solve. You know what I mean? Like the hardest thing for an entrepreneur in the early days, what problem to solve.
Basically,
and in this room, there are the 1,000 most important AI problems for companies globally, because you all represent every sector: banking, insurance, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, retail, control systems, right? And so you all know what the problems are. So I think, and so my ask there would be like, put those out, and you'll see startups approach you, whether they already have the solution. If not, we can build on it. And the last thing I would say is, look, I'm hoping that all of you that manage thousands, if not tens, if not hundreds of thousands of humans today, right? 10 years from now, you'll be managing, let's say you manage 100,000 people, or 10,000, and you're going to go to 100,000. You'll have 10,000 humans, and you'll have 90,000 agents, right? And I think that is the future and the way to think about organizational architecture.
Yeah. So I think it's one other thing we discussed is important to understand where and what problems we want to solve. If each GCC can bubble that up, that is a great thing. And if you actually know the problems that you can solve, maybe it's time for some of you to even become the entrepreneurs that Rajan can invest in.
Oh yeah, I didn't say that, but that's a great idea too.
Yeah, okay. So I think the reality after this 30 minutes, I agree, is somewhere in the middle of the hype versus my pessimism. Of course, everything is anchored very deeply in the understanding of business use case. And to Rajan's point, if you're able to prove 10x, that is something that will maybe go through a lot of inertia that we have built in our systems to get to implementation. Thank you all, and thank you, my dear panelists, for this wonderful session.
Thank you.
Thank you.